Welcome to our podcast. We're excited to have you along for this journey. My name is Madison, and I'm the Executive Director of Peace Restored. I'll be your host as we discuss mental health and faith in our podcast, Seeking Healing, Finding Hope, which is a production of Peace Restored, a 501c3 nonprofit located in Indiana and serving women everywhere. Today in our podcast, we'll be discussing part 4 of coping and journaling. Last time, we discussed various coping techniques. If you didn't get a chance to catch our other podcast on coping and journaling, we encourage you to go back and listen to episodes 11, 12, and 16. I am excited to have Emily Key join us today for this conversation. Some of you may have been getting to know Emily through our social media pages, as she's currently our marketing intern. But most of what you see on our social media pages is because of Emily. Emily joined our staff of Peace Restored towards the end of 2022. But during her time with us, she was also been a student at the University of Indianapolis, and she's working towards her degree in social work. So beginning earlier this year, Emily also joined us as a social work intern. And so she has the unique privilege of having a dual role with us here at Peace Restored. And we're thrilled to have her on staff and also joining us in studio today. So welcome, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So Emily, it's been a little bit for you and I since we've had a conversation on journaling. For our audience, it may not seem as long,
right.
But for you and I, it's been a few weeks. And so last time we were together, we discussed we discussed kind of like the basics of journaling, how to begin. I would kind of say in essence, maybe journaling 101 or kind of the foundations of journaling.
Right.
Yeah. But today we're going to go a little bit deeper in journaling and maybe how to integrate and how to find that regular rhythm and whatever however you define a regular rhythm too. We're going to talk about that. So we begin to journal. The question always comes up is how often, when should I do it? Or maybe even how long should my journaling writing be? That's a lot of pressure to put on yourself as you're trying to start something new, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Makes you think that there's only one way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. It's almost like it's a predetermined box. Like I have to do it this way.
Right.
And you might even have people around you telling you, like, if you're going to journal, you need to do this, this, and this.
Right.
Yeah.
Which we spoke last time about how you need to mold it to yourself and what works for yourself. So if people are like saying, this is how I do it, that's great for them, but it might not work for you.
Right. There's so many things that we need to remember that we need to personalize because we are all individually made and created. And so if there's a one size fits all, then, well, there'd be a lot of things that weren't needed in this world.
Right.
But we're just so all unique. And so we have to realize that unique isn't bad. It's who you are. And so we have to celebrate that and step into that space. So let's talk a little bit about maybe that idea of the length of journaling. So the first thing we kind of think about is how long do you do journaling, or how long do you write when you're journaling, or whatever it is that you do when you're journaling. So how long should that be?
Well, there's not a concrete answer, but it's recommended that you do not try to do like, oh, I'm going to do 30 minutes every single day, because that can be a hurdle and sway you away from not continuing to journal.
Yes.
So my recommendation would be to start small and then build up rather than try to go for super long every day.
Yeah, that would be really hard, wouldn't it? I mean, I think about if we try to start at 30 minutes, that could feel really intimidating.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's hard to hold the same stream of thinking for 30 minutes straight when you have a lot coming at you.
Right.
So it's a really good idea for us to start small to give us kind of that freedom, if you will, and permission to be able to do things at our own pace and what works for us. So when you think about that person who's starting journaling for the first time, they have their book sitting out and they've opened up this blank page. What's some feelings that you think they might feel the first time they look at that blank page?
Probably, like you were kind of saying, intimidated, maybe anxious to see what you're going to put down. Probably. But it also could be a positive thing,
it could
too.
Be.
And it could be like
excitement,
self-care, excitement, being able to take time for yourself and to balance and all
There might
those
even be a
things.
release that comes.
Right.
I'm like, oh my gosh, I finally get to let all this out. There might be a feeling of safety, like, oh, I've never been able to express these feelings before. It could also be that they start to edit themselves
Right.
before they even start to write. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, where you're thinking, I got to, even just thinking a thought sometimes, and before you speak it, we start to self-edit.
Right.
And so there's lots of things that can happen before you even put pen to paper. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I love the idea, what you said, Emily, is that we need to start small. Because when we start small, that really is the key, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's kind of like learning to run a race. You don't just go out and run 4 or 5 miles the first time you've ever ran.
At least you shouldn't.
You shouldn't. And if you do, congratulations.
Well, you're probably going to feel that, right?
Yeah, the next morning. But yeah, so just starting small, like 5-10 minutes, whatever feels right. Now, if you start and you're just going, you can keep going, but don't always hold yourself to that standard the next time you do it.
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes you might need to have that, if you will, that heavy sprint to get some things out. But it's okay to pace yourself, just like in that running analogy, right? So sometimes we have to pace ourselves and know that if today is my first day ever running, like you said, you're probably not going to pick up and go, I'm going to go run 4 or 5, 10 miles today. Yeah. Your body's probably going to rebel a little bit, maybe more than likely. And unless you're already physically fit, maybe if you're already at prime condition, that's different.
Right.
But if you're somebody who's not, that's not their normative, and going out just running, and it's the same thing with journaling. If it's not your normative to be processing in that form, give yourself some grace. You have to build up to that. Give yourself the space and time to work through it, and just do a little bit at a time, just a couple minutes. You can start out with just 5 to 10 minutes.
Right.
I mean, it could even be just a couple of minutes, really. Like, there's really no rule.
Right. The bottom line is that you're taking some time out of your day to reestablish your thoughts and feelings and put it on paper, or however you're going to do it. And I think that's the important part, is that you're taking that time for yourself to just have that moment with yourself, being authentically truthful.
Yeah. So I love that we're, the idea of writing for as long as you need to, or as little as you need to. But do you think that do you think we should journal every day? Or is there a rule to that, or a recommendation of how often, or the frequency of journaling?
Yeah, I think that there would be no set rule that you could just say for everyone, especially because, as we'll get into, there are different types of journaling as well. And so the frequency is going to be different depending on what you're journaling and the purpose that you use for journaling. So if you're someone who loves routine, maybe you do like to do it every day. But if you're someone who doesn't really need routine, then you shouldn't set yourself up for failure before you even get started. So
yeah, that's good. So giving yourself permission again to say, okay, well, maybe I need to do this every day. It's important to me. I need that rhythm, that regular rhythm. Or maybe you need to just say, I need to use this as a tool when I need an outlet or a space to process, or I have a moment, So it's going to be different for every person. And that's, again, it's okay. There's, as if you're listening to this, you're probably hearing over and over again, there's no rule.
Right.
It's what works for you. Now, the thing that pops in my mind as we're saying that there's no rule, I would just say that if you're working with a therapist and they're recommending you to do a certain rhythm, we would obviously default to that. We want you to follow the lead of your therapist, but you also need to be honest with them that if a therapist is asking you to do it every day and it's feeling overwhelming to you, you need to have that conversation with them and be like, look, I want to do what you're saying, but here's what's happening to me, because that's part of the process in the counseling office, is to kind of wrestle through those things of why and then how to adjust. So make sure you're having open and honest conversations with your therapist or counselor that you're working with, so that way you can make sure it's a good plan that works for you.
Right.
So, yeah. So when we're thinking about starting journaling, what are some of the maybe settings that we want to have for ourselves, or things that we want to make sure that are around us, the aesthetics, if you will?
Yeah. Definitely somewhere with minimal distractions. as we kind of talked about with how often you should do it, you need to be in a space where you're able to fully be present with what you're doing, and you're not like running around watching TV, whatever else is going on, which can be really hard to find, especially if you have children or pets or something like that. So definitely somewhere that has little distraction where you can really just be with yourself.
Yeah, so that's really important, right? To find that space where we can just be still. I'm thinking of the person that's listening to this podcast and going, I don't think that place exists for me. I don't think I have a quiet space. I'm thinking, maybe they're a single parent, or they're just in a really busy season. Maybe they are caretakers for their parents. There's so many scenarios there, right, where they may not feel they have that space. I'd encourage them to. I would encourage them to say, can you maybe try to look outside of normal time frames, or just really challenge yourself to see if you can find, even if it is 5 minutes, just to be alone. But what would you say to that person who says, man, I just don't think I have that? Do you think they should just not journal?
I would say no. If they need to journal and have the desire to journal, I would say that it would be best to, like you said, be creative and try to find a little pocket of time, even if it's in the bathroom or something like that. It doesn't have to be like out sitting by a tree listening to the birds chirp. It can be in your bathroom if it needs to be. So
it can be the 5 minutes that your kids are sound asleep for their nap time, if they have nap time. It could be, like you said, the 5 minutes you have alone in the bathroom. I know a lot of moms and dads, that's their few minutes of quiet time is when they're in the restroom. And it's, that's just, we have to capture those moments. And so there's all kinds of ways that we can try to build that measure. And it might be, I just thought of this as maybe it's when you're commuting from place to place. While you can't be writing while you're driving, we're not suggesting you get out your journal and write while you're driving. But what you could do is you could turn on an audio file on your phone. Right. And you could verbalize what to your phone into an audio file, what you're thinking and what you're processing. So just like, that could be another way that we do that. So finding that measure and that time in our space to do that. So I love the idea of, just because we're busy, to not stopping us from finding ways to journal. Right. So that kind of brings me to what we just kind of alluded to, is that there are multiple forms of journaling. We did talk about it a little bit in the last session, but one I just kind of touched on was kind of the audio. What are some other ways that people can journal for those who might have not heard the other podcast or might just need a refresher? Right.
Yeah, so obviously when you think of journaling, you probably think of pen and paper and writing words. But we know that there are lots of different ways to journal, and it's not just in that little box. So there's a lot of like creative ways through art that you can journal, and that could be like coloring, painting, taking pictures, anything that speaks to you maybe better than words do for some people, and can be like a creative outlet as well. Those can be great ways to journal. In your everyday life.
Absolutely. So, and there might be ways that people come up with that we don't even mention. Right. Because there's so much creativity out there in different ways and different mediums that you can journal and tell a story. Right. And so it's really, journaling is a way of telling your story, or and because part of our story is how we feel and what we think, our experiences, and that's often what we journal about. Right. And so if you think about journaling as telling your story, it really opens up so many ways of doing that. Yep. I was just thinking, what if I have a friend who just was she sings. She's she's really good at it, but years ago she used to write music, and she was saying how it's been a while for her to write a song and to write lyrics. So that could be also another form of journaling, if that's something that you have a skill in or your talent. Right. Maybe you're pouring your heart out and your feelings, and you're journaling through your writing of a song. And so there's so many ways that we can do that. Yeah. And so I just encourage people, if you're listening to this, don't limit yourself to what journaling looks like, because again, we serve a God who is full of creativity and wonder. And he's given us so many ways to do that. So we want to take advantage of those things that he's given us.
Right. Yeah, and that makes me think too, like, it doesn't even have to be like sentences or anything like that. It could be poems or,
yes,
any creative thing that is with words. Like, I'm also thinking maybe like a word map where you write a big word and then like little words around it, or like a web or something like that. It could look any way that works for you.
Yeah, I remember doing a group a few years ago for myself that I was a participant in, and they had us cut the words out of a magazine, and we glued them on paper. And it was because sometimes it's hard to find the word that you want to say, and so but it was easier to find an already written word than it was to write the word.
Okay, yeah.
And so that was really helpful for me during that season. And so again, it's just really just try to think outside the box. What do I need? How do I need to because journaling, the basic premise of journaling, right, is so we can process through what we're going through.
Right.
And have an outlet to do so.
Right.
So there's also some different strategies for journaling. We are kind of talking overarching of how to do the journaling, kind of the mechanics, if you will, the environment we want to set ourselves in. But there's also some different strategies. Can you list some different strategies and different ways that we might want to think about when we're journaling?
Yeah, so one type of journaling is called gratitude journaling. And so that can be really helpful if you're dealing with maybe something like anxiety or depression and you need to be grounded a little bit more. And so basically, it's what it sounds like. You just write down what you're thankful for. And so it can be in any type of format that you want. You could write sentences about why you're thankful for it, or it could just be a simple list. And this just helps you focus on the positives in life because, as we all know, it's so easy to only focus on negative things that's going on around you, going on in your personal life, that it's nice to be able to kind of take a step back and realize the things that there are around you to be grateful for.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think that's really great, especially if you're a worrier or someone who's maybe more naturally pessimistic, if you will.
Yeah.
And so it might be nice to do that. And I know there's actually books that you can buy that are gratitude journals. I've seen those at like Barnes & Noble and things like that. So you could even do something like that.
Yeah, because sometimes when we're in those really hard places, it's hard to remember the things that we need to be grateful for. So that's a really great journal idea of making sure we take time to process through what we're grateful for. Are there other types of journal options that we might want to consider or strategies?
Yeah, there's also the feelings journal, which I think is probably what people think of most when they hear journaling. And so that is just taking time to recenter yourself and check in with yourself. So it could be about what's happening that day, or maybe what you're feeling that day, or maybe you woke up feeling anxious and you're trying to figure out where that's coming from. It could be a really great way to kind of work through that. So yeah, it's a great reminder of what you might need emotionally from yourself and maybe the people around you. So yeah, I think that's a great, it's probably the traditional way because it's a great way to just check in with yourself. And
it is a great place for us to process through our feelings because sometimes those feelings are deeper than what we realize. And things come out when we're writing, and it's really an interesting process. If you've never journaled before, you may not have had this experience, but if you have, you may have been journaling and be like, wow, I didn't even know that was within me. And it's just something about that pen to paper process, and it just pulls things out of you.
Right.
And so it's a really great tool, and it also gives you good information when you go back and talk to your counselor, assuming you're working with one. So as we're talking about the different strategies for journaling, within these strategies, there are tools that come forward, and it really helps us process through some of our feelings. What's the next type of strategy that you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, another great way to journal is unsent letters. So basically, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's being able to write down things that you're not actually going to give to the person that would be receiving it. And so it might be for many different reasons. One of them could be that that relationship is broken between you and the person, and you can't say what you wish you could to them. It could be that they've passed away, and so you can't obviously tell them what you want to tell them. And maybe it's something that just hurts maybe it's just something that is too painful to say now, but you need to say it. And even if it's not to the person that you want to say it to, you're at least getting it off your chest and putting it out there so that you have more peace and more tranquility within yourself because it's getting it out there as you want it to be.
Yeah, it's really good because there are so many things that sometimes we hold in, we hold down because we don't feel permission to talk to them for various reasons.
Right.
I'm thinking, as you were talking about that, I was thinking of the podcast we do with Taylor, where it's unsafe people.
Right.
And so if you have people around you or your relationships with people that have been unsafe, there may be some things that you need to express to them, but they're not people who can receive it.
Right.
And so this might be a good tool where you can sit down and you can write that letter. Now, we're not suggesting that you mail it to them.
No.
That's why it's called an unsent letter, just to clarify. But what we are saying is you can write out and say sometimes some of the really hard thoughts that you're having. And again, if you're working with a therapist, you could take it in and process it with them. Another thing you can do with a letter, sometimes people feel it very cathartic to burn the letter afterwards.
Right.
Because there's that release of letting it go. But you can write a letter about, I've even used that in counseling with clients that I've worked with where they have somebody that they need to share some thoughts with, and they may, they, for whatever reason, they can't have that conversation with them. And so to have them do that, I find it to be, again, I think this is something you should do with another person, but can sometimes be really powerful if they can take that letter and read it out loud to the person, even though they're not there, but say the things that you need to say.
Right.
So first you write the letter, and then you sit with somebody else that can be hopefully a therapist or a counselor that can sit with you and just walk you through that process of being able to really, truly be able to say the things that you need to say out loud, because there's a power in saying those out loud. But sometimes we need to process them on paper first. And then if you feel willing to do that, then you go with somebody else to process it out loud.
And it makes me think, too, it can be positive or negative. You can say things
absolutely.
that you wish you had always told this person.
Yes.
And that could be like that you loved them or that you cherished memories with them. It can also be like, I'm really upset that you did this to me or that you neglected me. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be, or it could be a mix.
Right. It could be both and,
And so I think that's really healthy too, because especially with those negative emotions, we usually bottle them up, especially if a person's passed away or you don't talk to them anymore. It's so easy to stuff them down, but they're not really stuffed down because it comes out in how you interact with people in your daily life. So it's not actually stuffed down. And so I think it's really helpful to be able to kind of get that out there and to not keep it inside of yourself. So
yeah, it's so good. I love that you brought up that it's not just negative. Because often we think when we process through feelings and emotions, we want to think about the negative side of it, but there's so many things that can be positive that we need to process through. Because I do think of sometimes if somebody leaves our life too early, they pass away for whatever means, that we just don't get the opportunity to tell them all the things that's been on our heart. And so to be able to share that with them, to be able to share our hopes and our dreams, the things that we wish that we could have shared with them, that's powerful.
Right.
And so I love that there's both sides of it and that people get... again, this is a tool. What is it that you need from this tool?
Right.
So remembering that it's a tool to be used in the fashion that you need to be used in, not in the prescriptive nature that somebody's told you it has to be used in.
Exactly.
Yeah. So then that takes us to the next form of journaling, which is called streams of consciousness. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So this is a really interesting way to journal, and it's basically just writing down anything that comes to mind. So not making yourself sit down and think, okay, what am I feeling? You just start writing, and things might pop up that you didn't know were even in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I do love this for beginning journaling because sometimes it is hard to know where to begin.
Right.
And I use this a lot. I sometimes call it dump journaling. It's kind of the same premise. It's whatever comes to mind, and you just start writing it. You don't edit. You don't do any of the things. You're just writing it.
Right.
And it takes some of that pressure off of, how do I start? How do I know what to say? What do I need to focus on?
Right.
Just think.
Right.
It's going to just start writing whatever you're thinking.
And it doesn't even have to be full sentences.
No.
You can just write whatever your brain's thinking, and eventually you'll probably find out something that's helpful for you.
Yeah, usually if you sit in that space, something's going to come out that you'll be like, oh, where'd that come from? And you'll be like, all right. So it's interesting as you do that. So it is a really great tool. Again, that's a really good place to start at if you've never journaled before, to just kind of think, okay, well, I could try this and see how it goes. But really, any of these things that we've talked about today in the journaling process, whether it's, doing something that's very specific, like a letter, like we talked about, or doing a certain type of journaling, whether it's through art or word art or any of the things we talked about, all these are just ideas. Journaling is something that can be used for anybody at any time. And I'd even dare say that children can use it.
Yeah.
Because, again, we want to edit our kids. But if your kids are struggling through something, if you give them a piece of paper and some crayons and you say, draw me a picture of how you're feeling, they're probably going to be pretty authentic in what they're feeling. They don't edit themselves as well as we edit ourselves. And if we just give them the freedom to do that and don't put words in their mouth, it can actually be a tool that we use with our kids. So there's so much that we can do with journaling. I really love this conversation that we're having, and we have been having over the last several sessions podcast. If anybody's like, oh, I love what you guys talked about today, I want to dig into more, please go back and listen to those other podcasts. We're also creating this for anybody to listen to. So if you think this is a value, we encourage you to share it with your friends, post them on social media, whatever you want to do, because we want these to be a tool. We do this at Peace Restored because we want to give people resources. We want people to have access to various tools in the mental health world. Even if you don't have access to a counselor, we want to be available to you in this form. So, Emily, I love that we had this conversation today. It's really been a good episode for us to record together, and I've enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. It's been great.
So thank you for joining us today. If any of you have missed our previous episodes, like I said before, please check them out. We have many topics that we've been covering so far in our podcast series. In the meantime, if you'd like to know more about us, go to our website, peacerestore.net. Don't forget to check out our show notes, so you'll be able to find links and additional content. As we wrap up our discussion today, make sure to stay tuned as we continue to share with you practical ways where you too can seek healing and find hope. Join us in our next podcast, where we will continue to discuss mental health and faith. So come back next time for transformation, growth, and power. This is Peace Restored.